late 1960s California, a strange figure began drawing vulnerable young people into a world of fear, control, and isolation. What appeared to be a peaceful desert commune was quietly transforming into something far darker, hidden from public awareness and attention. Charles Manson was not a conventional killer, but a manipulator who understood fear, psychology, and the power of absolute influence. He surrounded himself with lost souls, slowly eroding their identity until obedience replaced independent thought, reason, and personal moral judgment. Inside the ranch, life became controlled by his words, where loyalty was demanded and questioning anything meant punishment or rejection. Authorities initially dismissed the group as another counterculture experiment, unaware of the dangerous transformation happening beneath the surface. But behind closed doors, psychological control deepened as followers began believing Manson held answers to existence, destiny, and survival. By 1969, tension inside the desert compound mirrored rising violence, spreading across Los Angeles streets at night. A series of brutal murders began shocking California, each crime appearing random, yet carrying disturbing signs of coordination. Investigators struggled to connect the dots as fear spread through communities, while evidence hinted at something organized and intentional. At the center of growing suspicion was a hidden commune, isolated in the desert, where control over minds was absolute. Manson rarely acted directly, instead influencing others to carry out acts that would later horrify the entire nation completely. Ordinary young men and women were reshaped into instruments of violence, stripped of identity and moral hesitation entirely. The outside world remained unaware that inside the ranch, reality had been rewritten through manipulation, fear, and psychological dependence. As murders escalated, investigators realized these were not random acts, but part of a disturbing pattern forming across Los Angeles. Fear spread across neighborhoods as residents locked doors, sensing an unseen threat moving silently through the darkness at night. Police began tracing connections between crime scenes, slowly uncovering links that pointed toward the isolated desert compound. Every new discovery deepened the mystery, revealing a network of influence far more disturbing than anyone initially imagined possible. Inside the group, paranoia grew as loyalty began fracturing, exposing cracks in the illusion Manson had carefully built. What investigators would soon uncover would expose a chilling reality that would forever change how America viewed cult influence and control. Inside the desert ranch, trust was no longer based on friendship, but on fear, obedience, and total psychological surrender to Manson's control. Every follower was slowly conditioned to believe the outside world was collapsing, and only Manson could guide them through survival. Isolation became a weapon, cutting them off from reality, family, and any remaining connection to their former lives completely. As nights passed, conversations turned darker, and moral boundaries dissolved under constant influence and psychological pressure from within the group. Manson created a reality where violence was not questioned, but reframed as destiny, purpose, and necessary transformation of society itself. Outside the ranch, Los Angeles was experiencing rising panic as unexplained killings began appearing in different parts of the city. Police departments across districts began sharing information, realizing the brutality of these crimes carried disturbing similarities in execution patterns. Investigators noticed that each scene carried symbolic traces, suggesting intention rather than random violence, deepening the mystery surrounding the case. Meanwhile, inside the commune, followers were becoming emotionally detached, losing individual identity and merging into collective obedience under one leader. Manson's influence did not rely on force alone, but on psychological manipulation that made resistance feel impossible and even dangerous. The desert compound became a closed world where time felt distorted and outside reality slowly lost meaning for those inside. As pressure increased, some followers began showing signs of doubt, but fear of punishment kept them silent and compliant. Each act of obedience reinforced the control structure, tightening psychological chains that bound the group more deeply to Manson's ideology. Investigators outside still had no clear suspect, only fragmented clues that refused to form a complete picture of the truth. But slowly, those fragments began pointing toward a single isolated location, hidden far from the public eye and urban attention. At the same time, fear across California was growing as news of violent crime spread through communities and households. People began locking doors earlier, avoiding streets at night, and whispering about a growing darkness they could not understand. Inside the ranch, reality had fully shifted, where loyalty to Manson replaced all sense of morality and personal responsibility. What began as a commune had now become a controlled psychological environment, shaping human behavior in terrifying and irreversible ways. And as investigators closed in without knowing it, the most shocking revelations were still hidden deep within the desert silence. Investigation was tightening slowly as detectives began realizing the violence was not scattered, but connected by unseen threads of control. Each new report from different neighborhoods carried similar brutality, creating a pattern that suggested organization rather than random chaos. Inside police departments, tension grew as officers struggled to understand what kind of mind could orchestrate such coordinated horror. Meanwhile, the desert ranch remained hidden in plain sight, continuing its isolated existence while attention outside slowly intensified. Manson's influence deepened further as followers became increasingly dependent on his approval for even the smallest decisions in daily life. Reality outside the group was reframed as dangerous and corrupt, reinforcing total separation from society and normal human relationships. This psychological isolation made the group more vulnerable to suggestion, as fear replaced independent thought completely. In Los Angeles, public fear escalated as news of violent crime spread through newspapers, creating widespread anxiety and uncertainty. Law enforcement began increasing coordination between agencies, realizing the case required deeper investigation than initially assumed. But critical leads remained elusive, as witnesses provided fragmented accounts that only deepened confusion rather than clarity. Inside the commune, obedience had become automatic, where questioning instructions felt more dangerous than following them. Without hesitation, Manson rarely needed to give direct orders, as influence had already been embedded deeply into the minds of his followers. Psychological dependency reached a point where identity itself began dissolving, replaced by collective belief and submission to authority. Outside the ranch, investigators were slowly moving closer without realizing how dangerous the structure inside truly was. Each new clue narrowed the search area, gradually pointing toward remote desert regions where few outsiders ever traveled. Fear across California became almost tangible, as people adjusted their lives around uncertainty and rising reports of violence. The sense of normal life was fading, replaced by suspicion, caution, and constant awareness of unseen danger. Inside the group, emotional stability collapsed further, as paranoia replaced trust even among the closest members. And as investigators prepared to close in, they were unknowingly approaching the center of a psychological storm, already fully formed. What they were about to uncover would not only explain the crimes, but reveal a level of manipulation few could comprehend. By now, investigators were no longer searching for isolated suspects, but for a system of influence hidden deep within the desert shadows. Every new piece of evidence pointed toward a controlled environment where normal morality had been replaced with obedience and fear. The pressure inside law enforcement agencies intensified as they realized the case was expanding beyond anything they had previously encountered. Meanwhile, inside the ranch, the psychological grip over followers was reaching its most unstable and dangerous stage. Manson's ideology had fully replaced personal identity, leaving individuals unable to distinguish their own thoughts from implanted belief. This complete dependency created a fragile environment where even small doubts could trigger internal conflict and emotional breakdown. Outside, Los Angeles continued to live in fear, as the pattern of violence created an invisible tension across the entire city. Residents changed their routines, avoided night travel, and lived with a constant awareness that danger could appear without warning. Investigators began focusing surveillance efforts toward remote desert areas, slowly narrowing down the hidden location of the commune. Every step closer revealed how disconnected the group had become from normal society, existing in a self-contained psychological reality. The ranch loyalty was no longer voluntary, but enforced through emotional manipulation and fear of rejection from the group. Even silence became a form of compliance, as followers learned that questioning reality could lead to isolation or punishment. The system Manson built was no longer dependent on physical control, but on deeply embedded psychological conditioning. As the investigation advanced, tension reached a critical point where law enforcement prepared for confrontation without knowing what awaited them. The desert environment itself became symbolic of isolation, secrecy, and the psychological distance separating the group from reality. Every indicator suggested that something deeply disturbing was being protected behind layers of silence and fear-driven obedience. Meanwhile, public anxiety escalated further, as media coverage intensified speculation and fear across California communities. The line between rumor and reality began to blur, increasing paranoia, uncertainty among citizens. And as authorities moved closer, the hidden world inside the ranch began to show signs of collapse under its own pressure. What they would discover next would expose one of the most disturbing cases of psychological control in modern history. The investigation finally reached a breaking point as law enforcement closed in on the remote desert compound, hidden from public view. What they expected to find was uncertainty, but what awaited them was a fully constructed world built on fear and control. Inside the ranch, followers sensed the outside pressure for the first time as the illusion of isolation began to weaken. Panic spread quietly through the group as long-maintained obedience began collapsing under the weight of approaching reality. Manson's control, once absolute, started showing fractures as doubt entered minds that had been conditioned for years. For the first time, the system he built was no longer unchallenged, and internal instability began, spreading rapidly. Outside, police operations intensified, preparing to confront a group whose psychological state was unknown and unpredictable. The desert silence surrounding the ranch felt heavier, as if the environment itself was holding its breath before collapse. Every step forward by investigators brought them closer to a truth that had remained buried beneath manipulation and fear. Inside, followers struggled between loyalty and survival. Caught in a psychological conflict, they were never prepared to resolve. The structure of control began breaking down, revealing how fragile the illusion of authority had always been beneath the surface. Law enforcement finally moved in, entering a world shaped by isolation, dependency, and distorted perception of reality. What they discovered was not just a crime scene, but the aftermath of years of psychological engineering and control. Evidence revealed how ordinary individuals had been reshaped into instruments of violence through sustained manipulation and isolation. The full extent of influence exposed a system where identity had been erased and replaced with blind obedience. As arrests began, the reality of the Manson family shocked the nation, forcing America to confront a new kind of threat. Not a single killer, but a network of minds reshaped into violence through psychological domination and fear. The case would become one of the most studied examples of cult influence and manipulation in modern criminal history. And even after the arrests, questions remained about how deep the psychological damage truly went inside those minds. In the end, the Manson family was not just a crime story, but a warning about the fragility of human perception itself.